Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Ron's Amazing Stories. We have stories that should thrill you a little and chill you a little.
It's amazing.
You will hear adventures sent in by you guys, classic stories from the pulp mags, and episodes from the golden age of radio. We have special segments like Ghost Stories with Sylvia.
That's amazing.
And the Paranormal with Jason.
I think we're going to have a lot of fun.
So settle in for the next hour and enjoy the show. Oh, and you just might want to prepare yourself to be taken away from today.
Another 5-minute mystery.
This 5-minute mystery is being brought to you by the graveyard. The fence around a graveyard is foolish, for those inside can't come out, and those outside really don't want in. What does that have to do with our story? Absolutely nothing.
Carol, you've got to get it from Uncle John. I need that money like I've never needed anything.
Look, Alex, Dad won't just hand me $5,000 like that.
But for Pete's sake, Carol, what am I going to do?
I want Mrs. Beeston to hear you.
Oh, Mrs. Beeston, that snoopy housekeeper. I don't care who hears me. I've got to have...
Carol! Yeah, you fool, she did hear you. In here, Mrs. Beeston. Oh, Miss Carol, something terrible has happened. Your father. Dad, what is it, Mrs. Beeston? What's happened? In the library. Your father. He's just been shot.
The room is just as you found it. You haven't touched a thing.
That's right, Inspector. Everything is just as it was.
You three were the only ones in the house, I understand.
Yes, just Alex, Mrs. Beeston, our housekeeper, and myself.
I see. Come out here for the weekend, young man?
Why, no. Carol and I had a little business.
Mrs. Beeston, I understand you discovered the murder.
Yes, I was just going upstairs when I heard voices in the library. I hesitated a minute because I didn't know Mr. Ormsbury had a visitor. And then I heard the shot. I ran in just as a man was jumping over the railing of the patio. Mr. Ormsbury was dead.
And this gun, you say, was lying just outside that French window on the patio?
Yes, Inspector. The window was open. And when I went to close it, I saw the gun.
I see. This bruise across the victim's temple has me puzzled. If there was no struggle, and there are obviously no signs of one, where did the bruise come from?
Oh, I think I can explain that, Inspector. When I first ran in, my first thought was to get Mr. Ormsbury to that couch. I just had lifted him out of the chair, and the horrible sensation ran through me that he was dead. I let go suddenly, and his face fell hard against the desk. When I picked him up, his forehead was bruised.
I see. I can understand your shock, Mrs. Beeston.
Yes, Inspector. The whole thing was so unreal, I could scarcely believe it.
Look here, Inspector, I can't see that much headway is being made. All the while we're standing here, my uncle's murderer is getting farther and farther away.
Oh, I wouldn't say that exactly. I'd say he was getting much closer.
Closer? Inspector, you don't mean that...
That I know who did it, Miss Ormsbury. Yes, that's exactly what I mean.
But that's impossible, Inspector. I saw the man myself escape through that window.
There was no man, Mrs. Beeston, and you know it. I'm arresting you, Mrs. Beeston, for the murder of your employer.
Why did the inspector arrest Mrs. Beeston? Do you know the clue? In a moment, we'll have the solution. But first...
Well, the sound quality on this one was bad, but I did my best to restore it. Oh, and this one has never been on the show before. How about that? Now, as to how the detective knew that Miss Beeston was the murderer, simple logic. Dead men don't bruise.
And now, back to our story.
But, Inspector, I don't see what Mrs. Beeston said that leads you to accuse her.
Plenty, Miss Ormsbury. But the thing that really gave her away was her explanation of how the bruise came to be on the victim's face. Mrs. Beeston explained it by saying that the bruise occurred when she dropped the body against the desk. What Mrs. Beeston didn't know when she cooked up that story was, dead bodies do not bruise. Obviously, the victim was struck on the temple to render him unconscious before the death shot was fired. And now, Mrs. Beeston, I think you'll agree with me, sometimes dead men do tell tales. Come along. We've got a ride to headquarters.
Well, that ending was a bit of a cliche, but rather appropriate. It's a known fact that if the blood ain't moving, the body ain't bruising. Science says don't confuse lividity with bruising. They just aren't the same thing. Why she killed him is the only bit that was left out of this 5-minute mystery. I hope you enjoyed it.
That you said.
Welcome to the podcast. The theme for this show is the graveyard. But really, this is only part one of the topic. On today's show, we'll be talking with Sylvia and find out how she feels about the cemetery, and we even hear her origin story.
Cutest origin story ever.
I believe it is. Then next week we will hear from Jason and get his view on the subject, which I can guarantee will be something completely different. So why 2 programs on the same subject? Simple. Chris Bennett from Rapid City, South Dakota sent in an email question and addressed it to both Jason and Sylvia. Now, also on today's show, we have 2 great stories sent in by you guys, and Sylvia tells us the strange tale of the Italian bride.
That sounds pretty good.
It does, doesn't it? Starting this week, Amazon is carrying podcast as part of the regular music service. You can now listen to your favorite shows, including Ron's Amazing Stories, from there. I put in an early request to get the show on Amazon, and I'm happy to say that I have verified that we can be heard there. Yet another location to listen to the show.
Ron, what about the thing with Google Podcasts?
I was getting to that. In similar news, if you've been listening to the podcast on Google Play Music, that service has ended its run and has been transferred to YouTube Music. However, the podcast didn't make the move with the music and can now be heard on the relatively new service called Google Podcasts. How about that? No matter how you listen to the show, thank you for joining me today for yet another set of astounding stories. What do you say we get to that right now? Did you know that Ron's Amazing Stories is sponsored by Audible? Audible is home to over 180,000 audiobooks, any of which can be yours. All you have to do is sign up for a 30-day free trial, and Audible will give you a free book and access to their original content. To download your free audiobook, go to audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. Thank you, Audible. And now, it's time for your stories.
These are your stories, sent by you, for you.
Welcome to Your Stories, the place where you tell us what happened to you. This time we have 2 stories from you guys. The first comes from Douglas Griffin, who resides in the classic city of New Orleans. I worked a night shift at this semi-swanky hotel next to the Louis Armstrong Airport. One night I got a call from a lady in room 204. She said there was arguing, loud banging, and crying coming out of 206. I checked the computer and no one was registered to that room. I said, "What the heck?" And I called my supervisor to see what to do. She tells me to call on-site security and to follow them up with a key. As we got off the elevator, I can hear the crying, and it's loud. My heart starts racing as we near the door, and I hand the keycard to the security guard. The next 5 minutes seem to happen in slow motion. He opens the door and immediately flicks on the light. Now keep in mind that we're on the second floor. There's only one door in, and it's 3 o'clock in the morning. As we enter the room, the shower is on, and steam is coming from under the door. There's only a single lamp on in the room, so it's still quite dark. One more thing. It's super cold. There's a red-headed lady lying curled up, crying in the bed, and she's facing away from us. The security guard approached her and asked if everything was okay. She sort of stopped crying and seemed to have rolled over. When she did, a wave of horror came over me. She was quite pale, covered in blood, and was just staring blankly at us. That's when we realized the shower had stopped and the door was open. There was a large man about 6 feet 3 inches tall standing in the doorway. He was holding a knife and looked like he was going to lunge at me. I turned to run, and as I did, I saw a police officer. He tased the man and he fell to the floor with a thud. Someone in the hotel had called the police. They ushered us out of the room and checked the woman. She was dead and had been so for quite some time. There is no way that she could have been crying. The police arrested the man and took him away. It turns out he was a very bad man and hides in empty hotel rooms and kidnaps those who stay there. I was asked to testify in the trial, and to this day I've never been able to figure out who was crying. I left the hotel and never worked in the industry again. Today I'm happy as a tour guide for a popular museum in New Orleans. Douglas Griffin, New Orleans, Louisiana. Man, that is one of those stories you never hope to hear and hate when you do. Why people can be so cruel is something that I'll never understand. I did a little research and I think I found your murder site at the Radisson Hotel. If I'm right, it took place in late 2016 and was quite the news story of the day. I won't mention any names here, but if you're interested, the story is out there. Thank you, Doug. This next story comes from Cynthia Sanchez, who didn't say where she was from. I've often wondered what the world of a nanny is like in real life. I have a feeling that Cindy's experience is a bit out of the norm for the average governess. Here is her story. Right out of college, I got a job as a nanny for 2 elementary-aged girls. For their anniversary, the parents went on a 2-week-long cruise, and I stayed home with their kids. The first few nights, the 8-year-old would come into my room multiple times and wake me up. It was obvious she hadn't pre-planned what she was going to say about having to wake me, so she would stumble through an excuse on the spot like, "I just wanted to make sure we're still going to the park tomorrow," or, "I think I forgot to brush my teeth and wondered if I should do it now or wait till morning." I figured she was just missing her parents and feeling out of sorts, so I let it slide at first. But by the 4th or 5th night, I was getting tired, and I knew I needed to get some sleep to keep up with 2 active kids. I told her that she wasn't to wake me up unless there was an emergency. I got a couple more hours of undisturbed sleep, but I woke up with this weird feeling about 5 a.m. I turned over and I nearly jumped out of my skin. The girl had brought over a chair right next to the bed and was staring down on me. It didn't help that she had long, dark hair, and this happened just a couple weeks after the motion picture The Ring had come out. Her explanation? "I just thought it would be fun to watch you sleep. I didn't wake you." We had a very long talk the next morning. Cynthia Sanchez from Places Unknown. Well, that would be very creepy. I'm not sure how I would have handled that one other than to follow your lead and jump clean out of my skin. What odd behavior, and I really don't know what to make of it. Thank you for sharing your story, Cindy. It truly is quite creepy. Well, those are your stories for this time. If you have a story that you would like to share, just like Cynthia did, head to the main website at ronsamazingstories.com and click on the story submission banner. And please remember to name your tale and tell me where you're from. Make your stories our story. We all love a good story, but what we truly crave is a ghost story. It's time now for Ghost Stories with Sylvia. Sylvia Shults is a librarian and author by day, but at night, she becomes a ghost hunter. Following a lifetime spent in the pursuit of the weird and the strange, her non-fiction works include Ghost of the Illinois River, Fractured Spirits, 44 Years in Darkness, Hunting Demons, and The Spirits of Christmas. We now cross over the veil and join Sylvia as she tells us more tales from the unknown. Are you there, Sylvia?
I'm here. Come on in, Ron. You okay?
Yeah, I'm all right. That's the first time I'm not going to cut a cough from the podcast.
Yeah, it's brutal out there, I hear.
I'm actually here to tell you that brutal doesn't quite cover what I've been through the last 2 weeks.
Oh, Ron, jeez.
Well, it started simple enough with a dangerous windstorm that we had sustained winds of 40 to 50 miles an hour with gusts anywhere from 90 to 100 miles an hour.
Good
That
Lord.
came first. But what made this wind unique was that we don't get those kinds of winds here in the Northwest during the summer. They just don't happen. And so what it did was, because we were already having 90-degree weather and we'd had several weeks of no rain, it dried everything out. Everything got dried out. And in fact, the average desert has a humidity of about 30%, right? Somewhere around there?
Right, yeah.
We were at 10%, Sylvia. In the Pacific Northwest, 10%.
That's outrageous.
And so the place lit up like a Christmas tree because the winds not only blew down trees, but blew down power lines. These sparked forest fires. And so we had places all over the Northwest here that were literally burning up, and as we speak are still burning. I'm going to say, if you're one of those people that are charitable and want to help out, there are a bunch of people out there that had their houses completely burned and are gone. Right after the big windstorm, the winds went silent, just dead silent. It was just, there wasn't even a tickle of the leaves. And so all of that smoke, we live in a valley, buried itself in the valley. And for several days, we actually had the worst air quality in the world.
Oh, my.
We're not talking the United States. We're not talking worst air quality in the history of Vancouver. We're talking the worst air quality in the world. And I got to say, it was absolutely hideous out there. But I'll tell you, today, the air quality is, last time I checked, it was at 112, which is what they consider unhealthy. But I took a walk today in our local park, and I got to tell you, it's the best air I've ever had. It was absolutely crazy, but it was nice. It was raining too, which is nice to have
I
the
bet that
rain
helps
back.
settle things.
Yeah, and so I was out walking in the rain this afternoon and feeling much better. And so I'm here to tell you, it's been a rough couple of weeks. I've lived in the Northwest now since I was 3 years old. I've never seen anything like this ever.
Wow.
It's usually rain followed by more rain, and then it rains. We don't have 10% humidity, relative humidity in the air. We just don't do that here.
That is just crazy.
So what do you say we get on to what we do here, and that is Ghost Stories with Sylvia.
I can't wait.
Well, I have a way of kicking off our topic this time. I think you're going to like it.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'm ready. Lay it on me.
All right. Well, I received this email from Chris Bennett. He lives in Rapid City, South Dakota. Ron, I have a question about ghost hunting. If possible, I would like you to ask my question of both Jason and Sylvia. I love to visit graveyards. They have so many secrets, and some of those can be found on the headstones. Now, I have heard both Jason and Sylvia talking about investigating these places, but I have never heard them talk about the headstones. Do you just search for residents, or are you as interested in the art of the epitaph? Well, Chris, I think that is an excellent question, and I'm going to turn it over to Sylvia just to start us off. What do you got for us, Sylvia?
Oh, man, that was an excellent question. And you're right. People who go ghost hunting also pretty much don't mind wandering around graveyards and cemeteries. I do have to say up front that it's kind of rare to find ghosts in graveyards. You find a lot of urban legend type stories of if you sit on a certain gravestone at midnight, or if you touch a certain statue's hand and under the light of a full moon, something horrible will happen to you. But that's mostly what it is. Ghosts usually haunt places where they spent time when they were alive. And cemeteries aren't usually places where that happens. So, yeah, it's really rare there are the odd haunted cemeteries, but we usually go to cemeteries exactly why you said, for the art, for the epitaphs, for the history that is buried there. Every single gravestone there has at least one story, and it's the people that are resting underneath those stones. I love going to cemeteries. I love walking around, seeing the dates, seeing the art that people choose to remember their loved ones with. And it has taught me something, too. I've done several Lights Out episodes on cemeteries where I just wander around. If there's a ghost story associated with it, I'll tell you. But I usually just go there to show my audience how cool it is to wander around looking at these stories. I've done Mount Mora Cemetery, which is gorgeous. It's in St. Louis, Missouri. Mars Hill, which is a tiny cemetery way out of the way in the middle of nowhere. Mount Carmel, of course. And Archer Woods Cemetery outside Chicago is one of those graveyards that is purported to be haunted. But when I was there, I saw an incredible piece of graveyard art. And if you listen to the Lights Out on Archer Woods Cemetery, that if you listen to it on YouTube, you can see the gravestone that I'm talking about. It's flush to the ground, but it is the headstone of Sandra Bland, who was very active in the Black Lives Matter movement and lost her life being incarcerated. She died in jail, and they're not sure what happened. And she is buried in Archerwood Cemetery, and hers is just one of hundreds of thousands of stories in the cemeteries in the United States.
So do you consider yourself a tapophile?
I most certainly do.
Why don't you tell folks what that means?
That means someone who loves cemeteries.
When we were talking beforehand, you kind of mentioned that you go to a lot of these places, but you don't necessarily go there to find ghosts. And it absolutely makes sense, because how many people actually die in a cemetery? I would say
Very
none.
few.
I'm going to go with none. I mean, I suppose there's the rare case where somebody actually has a heart attack and dies while they're visiting a cemetery, maybe. I don't know, but you would...
People die all over the place. It wouldn't surprise me to find out something like that happened. And of course, you have the old ghost story where somebody is dared to go to a grave at midnight and they have to... take out a jackknife and stab it into the grave, the ground over the grave to prove that they've been there. And they get up to leave, having done that, and they can't leave because something's grabbing them from underneath the soil. And it turns out they die of fright, and they find them on the grave the next morning. And it turns out that they've stabbed the jackknife through the hem of their shirt or something and got stuck. And yeah. Old story.
We were also talking about some of the things that you can find in graveyards and cemeteries.
Yeah.
And of course, the largest thing that you find there are gravestones. And so doing a little research myself, I kind of wanted to find out, because I've been to graveyards for just pure, what am I going to find today in a graveyard? And one of the things that you might see is if you see a winged hourglass, well, that is telling the story that, well, time flies.
That's right. The fleeting nature of time.
Yeah. Or if you see a broken flower or tree, that symbolizes a life cut short. Or if you find hands in the prayer position, well, that usually signifies devotion.
That is pretty obvious, yeah.
Or if you see a hand pointing down, that could mean sudden death. Came on them suddenly. And a handshake can reflect clasped hands of a couple to be reunited in death.
Yeah, I think that's one of the sweetest ones.
Yeah. So, do you have anything like that? Have you ever come across something like that?
Oh, yeah. There was a cemetery that I went to. Oh, it's kind of outside Starved Rock, Illinois. I think it's called Moon Cemetery. And I found a very odd-looking piece of cemetery art. I love finding things that are out of the ordinary, a unique bit of cemetery art. It was just like you said, it was the stump of a tree that was cut off, signifying the life cut short. But this was not carved out of marble or granite. This looked like it almost looked like it was cast out of terracotta and then carved while the clay was still wet. The date was actually carved into this representation of a tree stump. And then it looked like everything was carved and the bark pattern was carved into the clay when it was wet. And then it was glazed and then fired. And it looked for all the world like something made out of terracotta. So that was interesting. That was absolutely unique. I've never seen anything like that before or since.
I've got a kind of a question for you. It's what do you think this means? You ready?
Okay.
If you're in a graveyard and you see a gravestone with a rooster sitting on top of it, what do you think that symbolizes?
If I saw something like that, and I never actually have, I would say that it would signify the resurrection, the rooster crowing at the dawn of a new day.
That's
what it
on.
would mean to me.
It is
Am I close?
symbol. Yeah, you're close. It is the symbol of Judgment Day.
Oh, okay.
So you're right on the money. That's exactly right. And I have seen a rooster top of a grave. And I got to tell you, at the time when I saw it, I thought, what, was this guy a farmer?
That's what I would have thought.
I had no idea, but it does refer to Judgment Day.
Huh.
Now, early on, when we'll say 1800s and before, most graves commonly were in an east-west orientation. Do you know why that might be?
That is because whoever was lying in the grave wanted to be able to stand right up at the Judgment Day and immediately be facing east towards the rising sun, towards the seat of judgment.
Again, Sylvia, you truly are a tapophile. That is correct. Very correct, in fact. And America itself is home to more than 144,000 graveyards in cemeteries.
Wow.
So you think about it, all of these things, all of these places, each death, each stone is unique. They tell a story. Even if they're plain and just say the name, it's still unique because it has that person's name and their time of that they were on the earth. So I think that the graveyard itself is fascinating, and it's a fascinating piece of history.
Absolutely.
A way to visit and see our past in a completely unique way. Yeah, you take New Orleans, those guys knew how to do death down there. I mean, they have some of the most ornate mausoleums in the world.
Oh,
and I know I've never been in Europe, but I hear it's even more fantastic there.
And I fell in love with Mount Mora Cemetery in St. Joseph, Missouri. They have, when you drive in, the street to get to the cemetery is quite literally a dead end. You turn off of a side street and the road leads right into the cemetery. And you go through the gate and it opens up into this gorgeous vista of blue sky and green grass and white stone. And it's all over the place. And as soon as you get into the gate, just to your left is something called cemetery or Mausoleum Row. And the mausoleums in that stretch of road are just incredible. There's things there. There's mausoleums that look like Egyptian temples and Greek temples and Roman temples and lots of Egyptian themed art. The one at the head of the row, the very end of the row, I guess the foot of the row. It looks like an Egyptian temple. There are two beautiful sphinxes flanking the door, and there are lotuses carved in the lintels. And the lotus was a very powerful symbol, Egyptian symbol of everlasting life, because the lotus has its roots in the mud underneath the water, but it reaches up through the mud and through the water, and its flower opens on the surface of the water to receive the sun. So the lotus is just about the most powerful symbol of the afterlife in Egyptian art, and I just love it.
I knew that.
So pretty.
Well, today when I was prepping for this show, I was thinking about what kinds of things am I going to put on this show? What kinds of things do we want to talk about? Got a phone call.
Okay.
A friend of the family.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, okay, I'll talk to this person. And so I was chatting with her, and she told me she was a fan of the show, loved the show, and wanted to tell me how much she appreciated it. And then I mentioned that I was doing a show on graveyards.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she told me a story about, well, it's not really graveyards, but it relates. You want to hear it?
Oh, yeah. You know me. I love hearing stories.
Well, here's what she told me. She said, my grandfather is a retired funeral director. One of his workers was cleaning up after everyone had left after a visitation, viewing, wake, whatever. And it was about 9 p.m. or so, and he saw one last guest walking around in the visitation room. He went to escort the gentleman out when he discovered that there was actually no one there. When he came back, he told my granddad, this is her granddad, the story, and described the visitor. He was shocked, fell out of his chair, and went to get a photo that he kept in his office. He handed the photo to the worker, and he identified the man. It turned out it was her great-grandfather who had just recently passed. And yes, he was also an undertaker.
Oh, wow. So he was perfectly at home in the funeral home. Huh?
Yeah, and that's something.
That is amazing.
Again, we were, beforehand, we were talking about Kismet and how all this stuff was working together. How about that, getting that story today? I had to tell it. And it's not really a graveyard story, but it is. I'm saying it is, and it's Ron's amazing stories, so there you go.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to ask you, do we have a Sylvia origin story about your first visit to a graveyard, or maybe Or maybe a story you could tell us about a visit that you had to a graveyard?
Oh, well, I have visited quite a few graveyards in my time, and I'm sure I'll visit many, many, many more. But one of my first was quite unexpected.
Okay, I'm not surprised.
Graveyards used to really freak me out. I mean, dead people, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I used to not be as much of a fan of graveyards as I am now. Now, this was when I was a kid, and kids are usually freaked out by this sort of stuff. My mom taught school in Missouri, and soon after she and my father were married, that they decided to take a family vacation and visit mom's students in Missouri. So we took a road trip to Missouri from Illinois, and it was my younger sister. Their first child had just been born 6 months before. So she was 6 months old. My other sister was 3 years younger than me. And so I was about 9 or so. And we took one of my cousins with too. So we all piled into the car and headed off to Missouri. So my dad was doing the driving, and he likes to drive late at night. So all of us kids were kind of crashed out in the back seat. And my dad kept on driving. It got dark. He was still behind the wheel. So we didn't stay up to see where the trip took us. We just all passed out in a big puppy pile in the back seat. So the next morning, I kind of blearily sit up and open my eyes and realize, hey, we're still in the back seat. We're still in the car, and it's light out, and we're stopped. And I raise my head up, and I look out the car window, and I see gravestones. We are in a cemetery. And I look around. I was the first kid up of the three of us that were still in the back seat. So my father does not really believe in hotels or motels or anything like that. He'd much rather be camping in a tent. We had brought the tent. So it turns out that he had stopped when he'd gotten tired, and he'd found a roadside cemetery. And he and my mom had gotten out of the car and set up the tent taken my infant sister into the tent with them, and left the 3 kids, older kids, sleeping in the back seat. And didn't tell them. Nobody told us. 9-year-old me was appalled to wake up and find herself in a cemetery.
Okay, that's weird enough, but he pitched the tent?
Modern me, grown-up me, would have been, hey, I spent the night in the cemetery. How cool is that? 9-year-old me was not as enthralled.
Okay. But there has to be laws against pitching a tent in a cemetery.
There are now. Yeah, you're not supposed to stay in cemeteries after dark. And yeah, I'm pretty sure what my dad did was actually technically not allowed. But try telling my dad that.
Okay, well, I wonder what the curator thought when he gets up in the morning and sees a new addition to his graveyard or cemetery. And what was his first thought? I don't know
that the caretaker actually did any sort of rounds or anything.
Well, I know that especially in older graveyards in Europe and whatnot, they have assigned caretakers that live on the premises in these cemeteries that care for the place year-round. So,
oh, yeah.
Yeah, and they have a name for that. Is it
Sexton, I believe.
Sexton, that's it. That's it, Sexton.
Mm-hmm.
And so... incredible. Sylvia, I'm sure you were marked for life that day.
Oh, you better believe it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I am extremely excited to hear your story that you have for us today. I have been looking forward to this all day. All I know is the title. I don't know much more than that. It is called The Strange Tale of the Italian Bride. And I know it has something to do with graveyards.
It most certainly does, because that's what we are discussing tonight. So we talked about graveyard art and statues and symbolism and whatnot. There is, in Mount Carmel Cemetery in Hillside, which is right outside Chicago, there is a lot of really incredible graveyard art there. There are a lot of famous people there. Al Capone's buried there. And there are several other, Frank Nitti and several other gangsters that are buried there. There is a really wonderful grave statue of the DeSalvo family. That's mother and father and several children in Victorian clothing carved out of granite. And that statue actually moves. It's designed to rotate on a pedestal. But the most incredible and famous piece of graveyard statuary in Mount Carmel Cemetery belongs to the grave of Julia Buccola Petta, the Italian bride. Julia Buccola was born in Italy around 1891 or so, and came over to the New World and fell in love and got married. Her mother was kind of against the relationship. She didn't really get along with Matthew Petta, so she just was not really jazzed about Julia's marrying and leaving the family fold. So Julia married Matthew Petta and got pregnant right away. But unfortunately, when she was 29 years old, on March 17th, 1921, Julia passed away in childbirth. She gave birth to a stillborn son, Filippo. Yeah, and she was from Sicily, Italy, that part of Italy. And the Sicilian tradition is that if a woman dies in childbirth, that automatically makes her a martyr because she gave her life trying to bring life into the world. So she was buried in her wedding dress, the white signifying the martyrdom that she'd just undergone. So she was buried in Mount Carmel Cemetery in Hillside. She's real close to one of the gates, super easy to find. So Julia, she had died, she was buried, and Philomena, her mother, was just distraught over this. She never liked Matthew Petta anyway. She had a gravestone put over Julia's grave, but it only says Julia Buccola. It does not say Julia Buccola Petta. Philomena just refused to acknowledge Matthew's existence.
Wow.
As far as she was concerned, that's the reason she'd lost her daughter, was because her daughter got married and got pregnant. So very soon after Julia's death, Philomena claimed to be having dreams in which Julia would come to her and say that she was still alive. And Philomena went to her pastor. She went to her church. She was very devout. And she said, "Look, I've been having these dreams. My daughter's still alive." And the pastor said, "You know she's gone. You know we had a funeral for her. You know she's buried in Mount Carmel Cemetery." And the mother said, I know, but I keep having these dreams and it's really bothering me. This went on for years. About 5 years after Julia's death, Philomena moved to Los Angeles, but she kept returning to Chicago, made several trips back and forth from LA to Chicago. And during that year, she kept bothering the bishop of the church that she belonged to, the parish. She brought it all the way to the bishop. She said, "Look, I've been having these dreams. My daughter is still alive. I know she's gone. I realize that, but I keep having these dreams. Can we please get an order to exhume her so I can see her for myself?" The bishop said, "All right, I'll see what I can do." And he pulled some strings and he got an order of exhumation. So 6 years after Julia's passing, the bishop came and Philomena came. Matthew actually, I don't know if he was there or not at the exhumation. He had just recently remarried at that point. So he was probably not in Philomena's good books anyway. But there was a crowd there, and they dug up Julia's casket, and they lifted it out of the grave and set it on the side of the grave, and they opened it.
Oh, no.
And they found Julia looking as fresh as the day she'd been buried.
No.
Her skin was cool, but pliant.
How?
It was a little bit waxy, but it was soft and flexible to the touch. There were people that reached over and touched her, and she looked like she was sleeping. Her baby had been buried in her arms, tucked into the crook of her right arm. Her right arm had decayed, and the Filippo was just, the baby was just skeleton. The baby and her right arm had decayed, but all the rest of her was fresh as a daisy. So they took a photograph and laminated it and had it put on the gravestone.
I'm looking at that photo right now.
So there are two pictures. This is very, very common in Mount Carmel Cemetery, especially with the Italian families. There are loads of pictures on the graves, lots of bridal pictures on graves. But I'm pretty sure that this is the only picture in Mount Carmel Cemetery of an Italian bride taken 6 years after she died. And it says that on the gravestone. Next to the photograph, it says, Presa dopo 6 anni morta, taken 6 years after death.
I got to tell you, while you were talking, I looked this up, and I am looking at that photo right now.
Yeah.
And this, what gives new word to creepy.
Yeah. It is something to see.
It looks like it just was just being put into the ground. She looks that good.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I'll have a link to this in the show notes.
Yeah, you ought to, because it's an amazing picture. I mean, you can see that the coffin has decayed.
Yeah.
The coffin looks like it's been 6 years in the ground.
And I can also see the arm you spoke of, the arm it doesn't look as pristine as the face. The face looks, there's no bloating, it looks...
There's a little bit of edema. Her cheeks are a little puffier than they are in her wedding photo, but she had just given birth.
Yeah.
So that's the explanation for that.
Oh, it's incredible.
As far as the explanation of why she was so fresh looking, nobody's really been able to explain that. Of course, the Catholics in the area, the Sicilian Catholics, said, oh, well, her body's incorruptible. She must be a saint. She must be very, very holy. The scientific explanation involves something called adipocere, which is the translation from the Latin is fat wax. Adipose, fat, and cere, wax. And it's also known as grave wax, grave soap. It's where the fats in a person's body kind of turn waxy. And it serves as a method of preservation. So they've dug up several bodies. They just happen to exhume them for one reason or another, where the bodies are fairly well preserved because of this adipocere. But Julia Petta's body is the most pristine of these. And they're not even sure that's exactly what was going on. That's just a theory. But it has led to ghost stories.
I'm sure it has.
Oh, yes. Mount Carmel Cemetery is right across the street from Proviso East High School. I think it's Proviso East. And of course, the high schoolers say, oh, yeah, we can look through the gates into the cemetery and we see Julia Buccola Petta wandering around. That's not really terribly believable. But in the 1980s, I think, there was a young boy visiting the cemetery with his family and wandered away and nobody noticed. And the kid ended up lost for a little while. And the family finally noticed that the kid had wandered off and running through the cemetery, calling his name, looking for him. And they saw him being led by the hand by a beautiful young woman with dark hair who was dressed in a white wedding dress.
Oh, wow.
And by the time the family members ran over to the kid, the young lady had disappeared.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I am looking at this headstone and...
It is quite magnificent, isn't it? It's a little weather-beaten now. I mean, it's been almost a century since it's been put up. Philomena insisted, after they found Julia's body so pristinely preserved, she insisted that her daughter was a holy relic sort of person, and she basically bullied her sons. One of them was named Henry Buccola. She basically bullied them into making this twice life-size statue and commissioning it. And they spent a pretty penny on it, too. And Henry was not exactly thrilled to be shelling out that kind of coin for a statue of his dead sister. But Philomena insisted. And now the statue is up, and it serves you can see it from quite a long ways away in the cemetery. It's an easy grave to find.
I read the epitaph. It says, Philomena Buccola, remembrance of my beloved daughter, Julia, age 29 years old.
Yeah.
It is an incredibly beautiful statue. I don't know when this picture was taken, but it looks fairly recent. And next to her is the grave of Gelato. Mm-hmm. So he got a gravestone himself.
Yep.
Pretty amazing story, Sylvia. Like I said, I will have a link to this story and these pictures in the show notes, so you guys can come see this as well.
And there is a Lights Out episode on Mount Carmel where I visit Al Capone's grave, and I also talk about Julia Petta.
So you've actually been physically in front of this as well?
Oh, yeah, several times. I love going to Mount Carmel. It's so beautiful.
It looks it. Wow. What a great story. Haunting, but great. I guess the last thing that I want to say, and I think I've already said it, but taking some time and visiting your graveyards really isn't a weird thing at all. It gives you a sense of the history of what's around you. And I think I mentioned that here in where I live, the oldest gravestones are from the 1830s. And that should come as no surprise because we didn't really establish anything here until the late 1700s, early 1800s. There wasn't anything here in the Northwest that meant anything. But there are graveyards that are here from that period, from the Fort Vancouver, from the Hudson's Bay Company, and all of these.
Oh, wow.
All of these people had to bury people, and a lot of those graveyards exist today. And just visiting that gives you a sense of belonging to an area simply because you can relate to the people that were here. Here lies, Jones, whoever, Jim Jones, that's a bad name, John Jones, who lived in from 1820 to 1845, died at a young age. And it's just incredible. And graveyards can give you that tie to your community. So if for nothing else, go and see your local graveyards for the history. And not for the ghosts, and not for the spirits, and not for the creepiness, but for just the out-and-out history that you can find there.
That's why I go to graveyards.
I guess that's my last thought on graveyards. Well, in something you said earlier, it makes no sense that spirits would hang there.
Right. Most of the ghost stories that you find in graveyards, like I said, they're the spooky on purpose stories, the urban legend sort of things. Mm-hmm. Most of them.
Most of them. We've had a few on the show that were unexplainable ghost stories that took place in graveyards. I know it happens, and they do become haunted. But for the most part, your graveyard is a resting place, a place to come visit your long-deceased friends, family, whatever.
Yeah.
Or your gangsters like Al Capone.
I got to go, when I was in Plymouth a couple of years ago, I got to visit my Mayflower ancestor, George Sewell's grave, and put flowers on it. So that was a really moving experience. I mean, you talk about visiting relatives in graveyards, and which I have done because I've lost people, but going and standing in front of my ancestor that took such a chance and came over on the Mayflower, and half of those people died in the first winter, and George Sewell was one of the lucky ones. He survived, and it's because of him that I'm here today, and that just blew my tiny little mind. It was a marvelous experience.
Incredible. Well, I think that's our chat on graveyards this time.
Oh, I can't wait to hear what you and Jason talk about.
Yeah, I'm going to do, just for those listening, I'm going to bring this same subject up. Jason and I have an appointment next week, and we're going to do a second show on graveyards, but from the point of view of Jason. And I'm going to tell you, his point of view is going to be extremely, well, if Sylvia is the rightist, Jason is going to have, his view is going to be the leftist, most far out view of graveyards that you're going to see. I can guarantee it. So
I can't wait.
So you have that to looking forward to. So let's talk about the blog for just a minute.
Sure.
This week it was The world's largest insect is 6 times longer than the world's smallest bird.
Isn't that amazing?
That is weird.
Yeah. It's something to think about. I mean, you think of the hummingbird, you think of the Goliath beetle, and yeah, sure, okay, I can see that. And then you had a comment about the world's largest bird, and what if the smallest insect was as big as the world's largest bird, which is an ostrich? Oh, it's terrifying.
That would be a big insect. Hey, I actually have a tie-in to this, to graveyards.
Okay.
Okay, you want to hear it?
I do.
Did you know that ant colonies and beehives have graveyards? Did you know that?
I did not know that. I thought they just chucked them out the front door.
Well, they do. Ant colonies and beehives have graveyards. And not only that, but they have special undertaker ants and bees whose job it is to collect the dead.
Whoa. They are organized little creatures, aren't they?
They certainly are. And that is our tie-in to your blog for the week.
Beautifully done.
Thank you. Now tell us about what we can expect in the next Lights Out.
Oh, the next Lights Out, it was Wisconsin Dells, and we are going on a ghost tour, a walking tour of the Dells, where we're going to hear ghost stories.
That sounds excellent. When can we expect that one?
Yeah, working on it right now, and hope to have it out by the time this show drops.
Well, folks, you heard it here. If you want to go on a Wisconsin ghost tour, go to sylviashults.wordpress.com and click on the Wisconsin Ghost Tour.
Yes. And while you're at it, check out Lights Out. The cemetery episodes are marked. They're labeled Mount Mora Cemetery, Mars Hill Cemetery, Mount Carmel Cemetery. So yeah, there's plenty of graveyard wanderings to be found in Lights Out as well.
All right. Well, Sylvia, I want to thank you for being with us today, and I enjoyed hearing the stories.
Oh, it was my pleasure as always.
Goodbye now, Sylvia.
Bye-bye.
Ghost Stories with Sylvia was brought to you by Gladys Goodies. I always have a great time talking with Sylvia, and I learn all kinds of new stuff. If you want to visit her on her home turf, head to sylviashults.wordpress.com. There you will find her blog and access to the podcast Lights Out. I will have links available in the show notes. Thank you, Sylvia. Gladys Goodies treats are a 100% natural, nutrient-rich treat that pets love to eat. You can get your treats and some really cool swag for your dog and cat at GladysGoodies.com. And don't forget to use our very own promo code RONS. That's RONS. And you'll get a 20% discount on all of your purchases. That website again is GladysGoodies.com. I hope you enjoyed this edition of Ghost Stories with Sylvia. That was episode number 455, and these are our thankees. Chris Bennett, Douglas Griffin, Cynthia Sanchez, and of course, Sylvia Shults. You guys made the bus go round and round. If you want to follow the podcast or the blog, head to ronsamazingstories.com. There you will find any of the links I mentioned and how to contact us. Do you want to help the show? The best thing you can do is to tell your friends all about it, and please leave reviews or feedback wherever you listen. Clicking that follow or like button makes us grow. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come again to find out what are Ron's Amazing Stories.